Hello, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm just going to start, as usual, with the latest numbers of COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 49,025 confirmed cases, including 2,766 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 740,000 people for COVID-19, with about 7% of these testing positive. Over 20,000 people have been tested daily, as provinces and territories continue to increase testing capacity.
Bonjour. Commençons avec les derniers chiffres sur la COVID-19 au Canada. Aujourd'hui, il y a 49 025 cas confirmés, y compris 2 766 décès. À ce jour, les laboratoires de partout au pays ont effectué plus de 740 000 analyses et environ 7% d'entre elles se sont avérées positives. Les provinces et territoires continuent d'accroître leur capacité de dépistage et depuis 7 jours, plus de 20 000 personnes subissent quotidiennement un test.
Slide 2. Earlier this month, we shared our forward projections and the potential resulting impacts on the healthcare system. Today, we will present an update on our previous projections and discuss the implications for moving forward. As I have said before, models are planning tools. They allow us to forecast infection and illness rates in the short term and to explore the effectiveness of different combinations and timing of public health measures to control the epidemic.
Diapositive 2. Plus tôt ce mois-ci, nous avons communiqué nos prévisions et les effets possibles sur le système de la santé. Aujourd'hui, nous allons vous présenter une mise à jour de ces prévisions et traiter de leurs effets sur la suite des choses. Comme on l'a dit, les modèles sont des outils de planification. Ils nous permettent de prévoir les taux d'infection et de maladies à court terme et de déterminer si les différentes combinaisons de mesures de santé publique prises et leur calendrier de mise en œuvre sont efficaces pour maîtriser l'épidémie.
Slide 3. As a reminder, our strategy is twofold: to control the epidemic by reducing transmission through public health measures, pushing that blue curve down, and to prepare our health system to meet increased demand by raising up the dotted red line of healthcare capacity.
Diapositive 3. On vous rappelle que notre stratégie comporte 2 volets. Maîtriser l'épidémie en réduisant la transmission grâce à des mesures de santé publique visant à faire baisser la courbe bleue et deuxièmement, préparer le système de santé à gérer une augmentation de la demande faisant monter la ligne rouge pointillée de la capacité de soins de santé.
Slide 4. In order for the epidemic to die out, we need to get to the point where each infected individual is only transmitting the virus to less than one other person, which is one of the primary objectives of all of our public health measures. Prior to implementing public health control measures in March, we estimated that each infected person passed the virus onto an average of just over 2 additional people. Today, stronger controls, including physical distancing, increased testing to identify and isolate cases, and trace and quarantine contacts are helping to reduce the average number of people each case infects to just above 1.
Diapositive 4. Pour que l'épidémie s'éteigne, nous devons arriver au point où chaque personne infectée transmet le virus à moins d'une autre personne, ce qui est l'un des principaux objectifs de toutes les mesures de santé publique. Avant de mettre en œuvre les mesures de santé publique en mars, nous avons estimé que chaque personne infectée avait transmis le virus à un peu plus de 2 autres personnes en moyenne. Aujourd'hui, des mesures de contrôle plus rigoureuses telles que l'éloignement physique, un plus grand dépistage pour cerner et isoler les cas et la recherche de contacts pour ensuite mettre ces personnes en quarantaine aident à réduire la moyenne de cas qui propage l'infection aux autres à un peu plus d'une personne.
Slide 5. So I will now provide an update on the epidemiology of COVID-19 in Canada. Slide 6. The epidemiologic picture in Canada continues to highlight regional differences, with our two largest provinces, Ontario and Quebec, representing more than 80% of all confirmed cases. British Columbia and Alberta are the next most affected provinces, accounting for 14% of confirmed cases. Elsewhere, case counts are lower, but all provinces and territories, with the exception of Nunavut, have reported cases. Confirmed case counts have more than doubled since April the 9th modeling briefing. This increase is largely attributable to increases reported in Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and Nova Scotia. The proportion of cases who have died has increased from 2.2% on April the 9th to 5.5% as of April the 27th. It is expected that the case fatality ratio will continue to change over time. Based on available information, 17% of cases have required hospitalization, and less than 5% have required intensive care.
Diapositive 5. On fournira d'abord une mise à jour sur l'épidémiologie de la pandémie de COVID-19 au Canada. Diapositive 6. Le tableau épidémiologique au Canada continue de mettre en évidence des différences régionales. Nos deux plus grandes provinces, l'Ontario et le Québec, représentant plus de 80% de tous les cas confirmés. Viennent ensuite la Colombie-Britannique et l'Alberta, qui représentent 14% des cas confirmés. Ailleurs, le nombre de cas est plus faible, mais l'ensemble des provinces et territoires, à l'exception de Nunavut, ont signalé des cas. Le nombre de cas confirmés a plus que doublé depuis la présentation de modélisation du 9 avril. Cette hausse est en grande partie attribuable à l'augmentation des cas signalés au Québec, en Ontario, en Alberta, en Colombie-Britannique et en Nouvelle-Écosse. Le nombre de décès est passé de 2,2% le 9 avril à 5,5% en date du 27 avril. On s'attend à ce que le taux de mortalité continue de fluctuer. D'après les renseignements disponibles, 17% des cas ont nécessité une hospitalisation et moins de 5% ont nécessité une admission aux soins intensifs.
Slide 7. Based on available information, some individuals are at increased risk of severe illness depending on age, gender, and underlying health status. Adults aged 60 years and older account for 95% of deaths. While only 45% of reported cases are male, males are more likely to be admitted to the hospital and the ICU. Almost 3/4 of cases with information available reported one or more pre-existing health conditions. However, no one is immune to severe outcomes of COVID-19.
Diapositive 7. Selon les données disponibles, certaines personnes courent un risque supérieur de maladies graves en raison de leur âge, de leur sexe et de leur état de santé. Les adultes de 60 ans et plus représentent 95% des décès. Bien que seulement 45% des cas signalés soient des hommes, davantage d'hommes sont admis à l'hôpital et aux soins intensifs. Près de 3/4 des cas pour lesquels on dispose des données détaillées avaient au moins un trouble de santé préexistant déclaré. Toutefois, personne n'est immunisé contre les répercussions graves de la COVID-19.
Slide 8. Canada has several regional epidemics as shown here. Many factors, such as differences in subpopulations affected and laboratory testing, contribute to these regional trends. We are observing slowed epidemic growth and a leveling off of epidemic trajectories across most jurisdictions in Canada.
Diapositive 8. Il y a plusieurs épidémies régionales au Canada, comme on le voit ici. De nombreux facteurs expliquent ces variations régionales, entre autres les différents groupes touchés et l'analyse en laboratoire. Nous voyons que la progression de la COVID-19 ralentit et que les trajectoires épidémiques se stabilisent dans la majorité des provinces et territoires au pays.
Slide 9. Outbreaks in high-risk populations are the driving force behind the regional epidemics. In particular, outbreaks in long-term care and seniors' homes are driving epidemic growth in Quebec, Ontario, and Nova Scotia currently, and are responsible for the majority of all deaths in Canada. Outbreaks in other congregate living and work settings are also driving case counts in some provinces. These settings include shelters, correctional facilities, and food and agricultural work settings with congregate housing for employees.
Diapositive 9. Les éclosions dans les groupes à risque élevé sont au cœur des épidémies régionales. Plus particulièrement, les éclosions dans les foyers de soins de longue durée et les résidences pour personnes âgées sont responsables de l'augmentation récente des cas au Québec, en Ontario et en Nouvelle-Écosse. En plus d'être responsables de la majorité, ça veut dire 79% des décès recensés au Canada. Les éclosions dans les autres lieux d'habitation et de travail collectif font aussi augmenter les cas dans certaines provinces. Il peut s'agir des refuges, d'établissements correctionnels ou des lieux de travail dans le secteur agroalimentaire où les employés bénéficient d'une habitation collective.
Slide 10. This slide compares how fast the epidemic is growing in several countries. For comparison purposes, country curves are aligned at day 0, the day the country reached its first 500 cases. Countries whose epidemics began earlier were chosen for this comparison. Canada's epidemic, the red curve, is at a somewhat earlier stage, hence the Canada line is shorter. Canada's epidemic slope is bending as the rate of growth slows down in response to our collective control efforts. Canada's total case counts continue to increase more slowly than most countries. Last time I presented this graph to you, Canada's confirmed case count was doubling every 3 to 5 days. At this time, the number of cases is doubling at a rate of every 16 days.
Diapositive 10. Cette diapositive compare les vitesses de croissance de l'épidémie dans plusieurs pays. Pour les besoins de la comparaison, la courbe de chaque pays part du jour 0, définie comme le premier jour où les cas ont atteint le nombre de 500. Des pays où l'épidémie a débuté plus tôt ont été choisis pour cette comparaison. L'épidémie au Canada, c'est la courbe rouge, est à un stade un peu moins avancé. C'est pourquoi la ligne du Canada est plus courte. La pente de l'épidémie au Canada fléchit à mesure que les taux de croissance ralentissent grâce à nos efforts collectifs pour maîtriser l'épidémie. Le nombre total de cas au Canada continue de croître plus lentement que dans la plupart des pays. La dernière fois qu'on vous a présenté ce graphique, le nombre de cas confirmés au Canada doublait tous les 3 à 5 jours. Actuellement, le nombre de cas double tous les 16 jours.
Slide 11, now we're looking at some modeling scenarios. Slide 12. It is important to recognize that models are not crystal balls and cannot predict what will happen. What models provide is a prediction of what could happen under various hypothetical scenarios to allow us to prepare for a worst-case scenario and to drive our public health actions towards a best possible outcome. Nationally, we are using 2 modeling approaches, forecasting and dynamic models. Forecasting models use actual data on the cases being reported over time in Canada to estimate forward on how many new cases we might expect in the coming week. Dynamic models don't use real-life case data, yet are useful in that they permit a longer-term view based on our knowledge of how the virus behaves. This helps us to visualize potential epidemic growth scenarios and impact of control measures that mitigate growth over time.
Diapositive 11. Les scénarios de modélisation. Diapositive 12. Il faut bien comprendre que les modèles ne constituent pas une boule de cristal et ne permettent pas de prédire ce qui se passera. Les modèles fournissent une estimation de ce qui pourrait se passer dans divers scénarios hypothétiques. Ainsi, ils nous permettent de nous préparer au pire et d'orienter les mesures de santé publique pour obtenir le meilleur résultat possible. À l'échelle nationale, nous utilisons deux approches de modélisation, les modèles de prévision et les modèles dynamiques. Les modèles de prévision utilisent des données réelles sur les cas qui sont déclarés au fil du temps au Canada pour estimer le nombre de nouveaux cas auxquels nous pouvons nous attendre dans la semaine à venir. Les modèles dynamiques n'utilisent pas de données sur les cas réels. Ils nous permettent d'avoir une vision à plus long terme qui repose sur nos connaissances du comportement du virus. Ils nous aident à représenter différents scénarios d'évolution de l'épidémie et l'incidence des mesures prises pour atténuer la croissance au fil du temps.
Slide 13. This slide illustrates possible trajectories generated by a forecasting model that uses real Canadian case data. The graph on the left shows the predicted number of COVID-19 cases could be in the range of 53,000 to 67,000 cases by May the 5th. The graph on the right, which is new, shows the predicted number of deaths due to COVID-19 could be in the range of 3,300 to 3,900 by May the 5th. Due to changes in the epidemiology of COVID-19 in Canada, including outbreaks in high-risk settings, the initial modeling projections on April the 9th underpredicted the number of deaths. This was because a lower general population case fatality ratio was used in the model that we had at the time. But with a large number of outbreaks occurring in long-term care homes, the actual case fatality rate was higher than the modeling scenario. The models have been adjusted with a higher case fatality rate, and we will continue to make adjustments to these forecasting models over time based on real data. Right now, we are seeing the tragic paradox of the epidemic playing out. As the epidemic comes under control and the growth of cases slows, the severe outcomes and deaths continue to accrue as COVID-19 takes a heavy toll among highly susceptible populations.
Diapositive 13. Cette diapositive illustre les trajectoires possibles produites par un modèle prévisionnel qui utilise les données canadiennes réelles. Le graphique de gauche montre que le nombre prévu de cas de COVID-19 pourrait se situer entre 53 000 et 67 000 d'ici le 5 mai. Le graphique de droite montre que le nombre prévu de décès causés par la COVID-19 pourrait se situer entre 3 300 et 3 900 d'ici le 5 mai. En raison de l'évolution de l'épidémiologie de la COVID-19 au Canada, y compris les éclosions dans les milieux à risque élevé, le modèle de prévision initial de 9 avril sous-estimait le nombre de décès. Cela s'explique par le fait que le modèle que nous avions au départ utilisait un taux de mortalité plus faible dans la population générale. Toutefois, compte tenu du nombre important d'éclosions dans les foyers de soins de longue durée, le taux de mortalité réel est plus élevé que celui prévu dans le scénario de modélisation. Le modèle a depuis été ajusté en fonction de taux de mortalité plus élevés et nous continuerons d'y apporter des ajustements au fil du temps et nous fondons sur les données réelles. À l'heure actuelle, nous devons jongler avec un paradoxe tragique. Tandis que nous commençons à maîtriser l'épidémie et que le rythme de croissance des cas ralentit, les conséquences graves et les décès continuent de s'accumuler pendant que la COVID-19 fait des ravages au sein des groupes très susceptibles.
Slide 14. You are now familiar with this graph and concept showing the potential impact of our public health measures on the size and duration of the epidemic wave. This slide illustrates the three possible scenarios we use for planning. The red curve for the sharp high peak represents the no controls or worst case scenario, where the majority of the population could be infected over a relatively short period of time. The blue line curve shows a scenario where weaker epidemic controls have been implemented to delay and reduce the height of the peak. The green smaller curve represents a best case scenario in which we implement strong public health measures to reach our objective of epidemic control. This is the scenario we are currently working towards, where each infected person only transmits to less than one other person. To stay on this green, best case scenario curve, we must achieve and maintain a high degree of physical distancing while also maintaining a high rate of case detection and isolation and contact tracing and quarantine.
Diapositive 14. Vous connaissez maintenant ce graphique et ce concept qui montre les effets potentiels de nos mesures de santé publique sur la taille et la durée de la vague épidémique. Cette diapositive illustre les 3 scénarios possibles utilisés à des fins de planification. La courbe rouge, caractérisée par un pic abrupt et élevé, représente l'absence de mesures de contrôle ou le pire scénario dans lequel la majorité de la population pourrait être infectée sur une période relativement courte. La courbe bleue illustre un scénario dans lequel des mesures de contrôle plus faibles sont prises pour retarder et réduire le pic. La courbe verte, peu prononcée, représente le scénario optimal dans lequel nous mettons en place des mesures de santé publique strictes pour atteindre notre objectif de maîtrise de l'épidémie. C'est le scénario que nous poursuivons actuellement où chaque personne infectée transmet le virus à moins d'une personne. Pour demeurer sur cette courbe verte du scénario optimal, nous devons atteindre et maintenir un degré élevé d'éloignement physique, de même qu'un pourcentage élevé de cas détectés et mis en isolement et de contacts retrouvés et mis en quarantaine.
Slide 15. All jurisdictions are working towards epidemic control. However, it is critical to remember that once we are on the downside of the slope, we must absolutely remain vigilant and continue our public health measures. By achieving epidemic control, we expect that only a small proportion of the population will be immune. So, until the population has developed a high level of immunity to the virus or we have a vaccine in place, we have to plan to live with a manageable level of COVID-19 activity. Therefore, we anticipate that some public health measures will need to remain in place to prevent the sparking and growth of future epidemic waves.
Diapositive 15. Toutes les administrations s'efforcent de maîtriser l'épidémie. Il ne faut toutefois pas oublier que, une fois que nous serons sur la pente descendante, nous devrons à tout prix rester vigilants et poursuivre nos mesures de santé publique. En maîtrisant l'épidémie, nous nous attendons à ce que seule une faible proportion de la population soit immunisée. Par conséquent, tant que la population n'aura pas développé un degré élevé d'immunité contre le virus ou que nous ne disposerons pas d'un vaccin, nous devons nous préparer à vivre avec un niveau d'activité de la COVID-19 gérable. Nous prévoyons donc que certaines mesures de santé publique devront être maintenues pour prévenir le déclenchement et la croissance de nouvelles vagues épidémiques.
Slide 16. We continue to monitor the situation closely and will evaluate, learn, and adapt as we go. We are making clear progress to slow the spread and bring the epidemic under control, thanks to the commitment of Canadians who are following public health advice to protect themselves and others. The epidemiology of COVID-19 is not the same in all parts of the country, so when and how control measures are readjusted and or relaxed will need to be decided based on the local epidemiologic situation. It is critically important that we maintain our public health measures, including physical distancing, until we have achieved epidemic control for the first wave. Relaxing controls too quickly will squander our collective efforts to date and put us at risk of future epidemic waves. Thank you.
Diapositive 16. Résumé. Nous suivons la situation de près. Nous allons poursuivre nos évaluations et continuer d'apprendre et de nous adapter au fil du temps. Grâce à l'engagement des Canadiens à respecter les conseils de santé publique pour assurer leur protection et celle des autres, nous faisons des progrès concrets dans le ralentissement de la propagation à la maîtrise de l'épidémie. Les caractéristiques épidémiologiques de la COVID-19 varient d'une région à l'autre du pays. Le moment à la manière dont les mesures de contrôle seront ajustées et assouplies devront donc être déterminées en fonction de la situation locale de l'épidémie. Il est primordial de maintenir les mesures de santé publique, y compris l'éloignement physique, jusqu'à ce que nous ayons maîtrisé la première vague de l'épidémie. Un assouplissement trop précipité des mesures pourrait annuler tous les efforts collectifs faits à ce jour et nous exposer à d'autres vagues épidémiques. Merci.
Thank you, doctors. We will now open the line and the floor to questions. As usual, we will start with 3 questions from the phone and then 3 questions from the room. Vous pouvez poser vos questions dans l'une des 2 langues officielles. We ask that you limit yourself to 1 question, 1 follow-up. For those asking questions in the room, we ask that you make your way over to the freestanding mics. Operator Eric, over to you.
Thank you. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous avez une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre téléphone à clavier. And the first question is from Lina Dib de la Presse canadienne. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour. J'essaie de comprendre. Je vois dans les annexes qu'il n'y a rien qui a changé sur les prévisions à long terme là, du nombre total de décès et du nombre total de cas. Pouvez-vous m'expliquer pourquoi ça n'a pas été rajusté en fonction de la même manière que vous avez rajusté vos prévisions à court terme là, jusqu'au 5 mai?
Voici Dr. New. Merci pour la question. Oui, les diapositives dans les annexes sont encore en vigueur parce que on a toujours estimé, par exemple, le dernier diapositive, les conséquences possibles. Si le taux d'infection, c'est 1 2,5 etc. Et ça n'a pas changé parce qu'on continue avec nos meilleurs efforts pour avoir le taux d'infection le plus minime possible. Mais à court terme, avec les données, avec les cas qu'on a déjà actuellement, on peut faire, comme il dit, une prévision, une projection à court terme, mais les projections à long terme, c'est encore en vigueur.
OK. Alors, est-ce que je devrais comprendre qu'en ce moment, on est plutôt dans le scénario minimalement là, du 2,5 de la population infectée? Et puis, mon autre question, c'est, vous avez dit que dorénavant, une personne infecte un peu plus qu'une personne. Pouvez-vous me donner un chiffre un peu plus précis? Une personne, vous êtes quoi dans 1, quoi là? On est passé de 1 qui infecte 2, combien à 1 qui infecte 1, combien?
OK, merci. Oui, je pense que si vous parlez de peut-être le diapositive sur la page 20, je pense qu'ici au Canada, actuellement, on est aussi dans les zones vertes. On ne peut pas vous donner un chiffre exact, c'est quoi le pourcentage de la population qui est infectée, parce qu'on ne sait pas jusqu'à la fin de peut-être la première vague et peut-être l'épidémie en total. C'est quelque chose qu'on ne sait pas en ce moment. Mais si
on sait que ce ne sera pas 1 On sait que ce ne sera pas 1 parce que c'est 4 000 personnes, 1 puis là, vous me parlez de 3 800 au 5 000.
Oui, mais c'est toujours quelque chose en évolution. Donc, on ne peut pas dire, on ne peut pas prendre une conclusion pour la première vague en total, ou aussi peut-être qu'est-ce qui va se passer avec les prochaines vagues. Mais pour la prochaine question, concernant le nombre de personnes qu'une personne infectée peut infecté de plus. Au début, c'était un peu plus de 2 personnes, 2, quelque chose. C'est difficile maintenant de préciser exactement. On sait qu'on est, comme on dit, un peu légèrement plus qu'une personne. C'est pas mal, mais c'est pas idéal parce que vraiment le but, l'objectif, c'est d'avoir une chiffre d'une personne infectée avec un cas, c'est moins qu'1%, parce qu'avec ça, ça va prédire que finalement, on peut éteindre la pandémie ou au moins les éclosions ici au Canada.
Merci. La question suivante, the next question is from Laura Osmond with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Thank you. I had a question about the case fatality count in the long-term dynamic scenarios. should those be adjusted long term? Can we expect to see more deaths, even in the best case scenario, based on the new case fatality rate?
So I think Dr. New said in French, actually, we don't know what the final outcome is yet. We are still on that first wave. And these projections are actually for essentially over the course of the pandemic itself. Until the epidemic is over, you actually don't know the true case fatality rate as the denominator and the numerators, it changes over time. So these are kind of dynamic, but until you actually get to the bottom of the epidemic, you actually don't know. So right now, of course, we think we're in that green zone. If you just look at the deaths, but we haven't got to the final outcome. So that's why I think Dr. New has just said that also in French as well. But that's green range is exactly what we're aiming for, and we believe that we're staying within that zone.
Thank you, Doctor. Follow-up?
Can we expect that the shape of that green curve to change dramatically over the next couple of weeks as provinces start to talk about carefully lifting their restrictions?
So I think this is the projection as of now. But I think it depends, on what actually happens in long-term care homes, for example. I think all province and territories trying very hard to bring any outbreaks under control, to put in place these preventive measures. I think when we see the virus going into a susceptible population, then and that they are at higher risk of severe outcomes, the case fatality ratio could still change. It could still get higher, is possible. But again, these curves we adjusted. If you see that curve itself, the graph on the right on slide 13, the further out you go in terms of from when we did the projection, the curves widen because the actual uncertainty and the spread and the range increases over time. Just because every day out from the estimate, your level of certainty decreases and those curves start spreading wider apart. But that's the range that we are forecasting at this point in time.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Operator?
Thank you. The next question, la question suivante, est de Marie Vastel de Le Devoir. La parole est à vous. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, Dr. Tim. I'm going to circle back to the previous question. In terms of the slide the last slide, in terms of the projected long-term deaths, depending on the percentage of the population that would be infected, I'm having a hard time understanding why the death rate isn't higher, given that you just said in the beginning that your short-term death projection had to be reviewed because we've seen more deaths in long-term care residences. So if we've already had a higher death rate, how come the long-term death rate isn't increased to take that into account? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you do, and I think for the purposes of planning, I think we are staying within that zone. But models do have to be adjusted over time. So some of these assumptions can be adjusted over time. But I think for our planning purposes, these three different scenarios are still useful at this moment in time. But you're absolutely right. I think we will essentially be adjusting as we go as well, even on the longer term. But I think this is the nature of models. But I think for planning purposes, right now, we're just sticking with these three scenarios.
Yeah, it's Dr. New. Maybe I'll just add to that is that if you look at that last slide and the scenarios, the green zone, the blue zone, and so on, I think a lot of it is also based on the experience that we've seen in other countries with sort of an overall sort of projected mortality rate. Certainly, right now, as of the moment, our death rate is higher because of we all understand what's been happening in long-term care facilities, etc. But if we obviously collectively do a better job down the road, then you might see that overall, as the overall pandemic unfolds, and at the very end of the day, when, as Dr. Tam said, you can more accurately calculate a case fatality rate, it may be closer to what maybe the experience that we're seeing in other countries and so on. So like Dr. Tam and I've said, models are useful as a tool for planning purposes, but they're certainly not the crystal ball that will exactly tell you how many people will be hospitalized or end up dying at the end of the day.
Merci, Dr. New. Marie, question suivie?
Oui, merci. And then if we go back to the short term then, I understand that the more you progress, the wider the projections are, but it is only in a week. So if you look at the situation right now, the death rate that we are seeing for the past few days overall in the country, right now, is your curve closer to the red curve of slide 13, or are we tending closer to the green curve? In other words, right now, with what we're seeing in the past few days in terms of death rates per day or cases per day, where do you see the curve going most likely? Or is it the black curve in the middle?
It's Dr. New. I'll start off and hand it over to Dr. Tam. As we've said, is that the reason we only want to give, let's say, short-term projections is because of that level of uncertainty. The farther out you go, and as you can see here, based on the model, sort of the projections by our experts, what we talk about usually in epidemiology and modeling is what we call a 95% confidence interval. And you can see that's why we have, quote, the upper and lower limit. And so in the middle is sort of where we think we're tracking, and we have that, quote, upper limit and lower limit in terms of the confidence limits. But you're right, we have to actually see what unfolds over the coming days. The other point I think we've made repeatedly is that, if you're looking at deaths, et cetera, it's kind of hard to look at predictions because they really are the result in many ways of activities, what the general population, what was happening in long-term care facilities sort of like 2 or 3 weeks ago, obviously, because, by the time the incubation period, unfolds and testing, et cetera, and so on. So obviously what we do today will have a direct impact on what we see in terms of the actual data 2 to 3 weeks out from now. So that I think is an important point to underline. Dr. Tam?
Maybe I'll just suggest those with better eyes than me on a tiny piece of paper right now. If you looked at today's date, I think and we just indicated that we had 2,766 deaths. It is trending within the line of prediction. And so if you just went across this graph a couple of days from the last time we checked in on the data, it is trending as this particular curve and within that range. So we will see in the next few days what happens.
Thank you, doctors. Now we will go in the room. Stevie?
Hi, thank you very much for doing this today. You've said that 79% of deaths have been tied to long-term care facilities, and the deaths have only gone up since the federal government released its previous modeling a few weeks ago. What did the new models show about how effective the various measures have been to try to control outbreaks in long-term care homes and seniors' homes? And as well, how many of the overall deaths in today's models will be tied to long-term care facilities?
Again, whatever we do today will result in the sort of final picture that we're going to see. And so working really, really hard in getting outbreaks under controls, not just in the long-term care homes, but some of the other settings that are also laid out in that slide, including the persons who have experiencing homelessness. Some of correctional institutes and others are really important right now. So I think what we do now to get those settings prepared will eventually influence the final picture for sure. I think, though, if you looked at the various composite amount of information we gave you, is that it is really slowing down. The doubling of the cases went from about 3 to 5 days the last time we spoke to now closer to every 16. And the epidemic is slowing down in the different provinces and territories. But the data that we present at the national level, I think there was a question about, where that effective reproduction number is at. What we're showing you is a composite picture. What you will see that in some jurisdictions, they actually haven't had community transmission. Their R is going to be under 1. And others are still working at this, some of the bigger provinces, as they are working really hard at getting some of the clusters under control. I think in our discussion with chief medical officers, we're also trying to look at the epidemiology itself, because the transmission dynamics inside a relatively confined cluster is different than looking at general community transmission as well. So that kind of epidemiology, provinces will take into account as they look at when and how they're going to relax some of their measures.
Follow up?
Yes. Ontario and Quebec represent about 80% of confirmed cases. And given that it appears there's no leveling off right now in either province, do you believe it's too early for the premiers and those governments to be considering lifting restrictions and even considering opening schools and industries?
Well, I think in all jurisdictions, including Ontario and Quebec, things are slowing down despite the fact that, of course, we're still seeing cases and they are all working really hard. I think it is important to collectively plan forwards. And so with Chief Medical Officer of Health, we collaborated on looking at the common criteria, some of which are very much reflected in what the provinces have spoken to, like Ontario, for example, looking at getting the epidemic under control, making sure you have the public health capacity in place for testing as well as contact tracing and case isolation and quarantine, as well as ensuring that your healthcare surge capacity is still there. And so all of those kind of factors go into the way that they make the decisions as well. So we are also collectively looking at when the time is right for each jurisdiction, what some of those initial measures could be in terms of easing back some of those public health measures. And certainly educational settings, including schools, are very much part of that discussion, including the fact that even with limited evidence, the graph that we showed you show that the younger populations don't experience the severe illness as much as those persons over the age of 60. So that's part of the considerations, I think, in terms of safe return of kids to school. I think what we are really happy to see is that every jurisdiction have said that we really need to move cautiously. So you may want to start with some schools in an area that isn't really in the hot zone. And then you progressively monitor what happens, and then you gradually ease back certain other settings as well. So I see that all provinces are really sort of aligned with some of those public health criteria, and that they are moving cautiously through those plans. So I think planning is actually important for work settings as well. I think chief medical officers have said, here are some public health parameters, but we need different work settings and sectors who knows their own workplace really well to see if they can come up with the kind of plans that are needed in preparation for when the time is right.
Yeah, Dr. New, maybe I can just add to that. Certainly the authorities in each of the provinces and territories they're closer to the ground than obviously we are at the federal level. So they have more data to work with, and they know exactly what's been happening in their jurisdiction. So I'll pick the province of Quebec as an example. We all know that the tragedy that's unfolding in their long-term care facilities. So certainly the efforts there are they're doubling and redoubling at looking at testing residents and staff and so on and so forth. So that's a special situation. But then if you look at, quote, the rest of the general population, that's also depending on the region. So certainly Montreal is a hotspot. And so what they may wish to do in Montreal, even in terms of opening schools and so on, may be to a different schedule or rhythm that they may consider in other parts of the province. Also to add to what Dr. Tam said, that all of us, including obviously our counterparts in Quebec and the other provinces, are looking at the scientific evidence and seeing how it's evolving. And in terms of the children, it's very interesting. There is limited data out there, but we're looking at it carefully. As Dr. Tam said, it appears that children in general have milder symptoms, obviously, compared to older adults. Another point that's interesting is based on some of the evidence we looked at, the children also don't seem to be sort of major transmitters or responsible for further propagation. So all those types of evidence and what we have in terms of the data is certainly, I think, being an important part of the considerations that all public health authorities in each of the provinces and territories are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tam and Dr. New. Chanstar?
Good morning. Dr. Tam, can you help me understand? So a lot of this looks a lot like what you presented April 9th, and the assumption in the graph on the page 14 suggests that you see, again, 1 to 10% of the population infected with strong controls, which we have now. And you see it peaking in the summer and then petering out by the fall. I'm just curious if you can help me understand, first of all, what's the number of the population? Is that the 10% we see on page 21? You see that up to 10%, 3.7 million under your scenario that would peter out by the fall would be infected. And I'm curious if that's then what you're projecting. I don't understand how you see the epidemic petering out when you yourself have cautioned against any assumptions about herd immunity by then, and we won't have a vaccine by then. We won't, so help me understand what you're saying there.
So these are just planning scenarios.
But you must have numbers, right? You have actual numbers.
So these are the tables that you see in, I think, in the annex. And the green, the blue, and the red correspond to those numbers. And these... the 1 to 10% in the green bars at the back is what you will sort of project as being under that green curve, and the blue one and the red one, for example, and the attack rates that have been, indicated on slide 14. Those are the numbers that are being displayed in that table, and you can certainly refer to that. And we don't have no control, so I think that can be put aside. We are trying to, of course, working very hard, and I think we are staying in that green zone. This is for the course of the pandemic, and you're right in that, the following slide shows that epidemic could result in further, because there's no, we have to do some of the serologic investigations to know what the underlying proportion of the population infected is. But it's very likely that we don't have that high level of immunity. So when we discuss across the country with the chief medical officers, that is the assumption that we have to maintain a certain level of public health measures, have to be really careful, and we are actually going to be living with COVID-19 for the near future and monitoring very carefully so that if there's any upswing, that any cases and contacts have to be identified and managed so that you don't get that upswing again. Now, I have to say that some of the modeling work going on right now with the dynamic models they're basically showing what will happen if we didn't achieve epidemic control and didn't have effective public health measures in place when we begin to ease some of these measures, is that we could see a second wave that is even bigger than the first. So everything is dependent on what we're doing right now. So if we do everything that we're doing right now and maintaining and easing through things really slowly and cautiously, we can get to the bottom of that initial wave. But even then, you have to be extremely careful about what is going to happen. And so, and different shifts, and if you don't detect those cases and manage them really fast, that's when you could potentially get that second wave. So I think conceptually that's what slide 15 is trying to say, is that we've got to keep going with our measures.
Yeah, it's Dr. Newman. I would just add to that. Certainly, Dr. Tam and myself, we're not thinking that, as you said, that the epidemic or pandemic is going to peter out in Canada. With all of our collective efforts, we're flattening the curve, and we're certainly hopeful that we're on hopefully close to, or if not getting towards the downside of that first wave. But there are a couple of things that certainly will be in play as we move forward. Certainly, the basic core principles in terms of good physical distancing, people maintaining that, the hand washing, the cough etiquette, all those basic things will still be in play. And then, of course, as Dr. Tam has also mentioned, each of the provinces and territories, if they're considering in terms of what they might want to do in terms of maybe loosening or relaxing some of the public health measures, you have to assure you have a good surveillance system, good laboratory capacity, public health system that's in place to be able to rapidly detect, isolate cases and so on, so that you are able to see if the measures are maybe not having any intended effect. And then as well, you need to make sure that you have the hospital capacity, should there be an upswing in cases, that you're able to accommodate patients that come in and so on and so forth. So there's lots of things in play that all of the chief MOHs are looking at. And certainly what we're looking at is not that after the first wave where we're in the clear. We're anticipating a second, third, who knows how many waves. But we're trying to find a manageable level in terms of, as you say, opening up the economy, relaxing measures so people can go outdoors, but with a manageable level of a certain, I guess, COVID-19 activity that be sort of percolating, I guess, in the general population. Each province and territory is different in terms of their own context, what the issues are in terms of how it's being transmitted within key subpopulations, long-term care facilities, et cetera. So those are some of the considerations that obviously each of the chief medical officers of health, as well as ourselves on our special advisory committee, are discussing on a daily basis.
Can you confirm then, based on what I'm seeing here, it looks a lot like what you released before. So it's not an actual model. You haven't provided your input data, your methodology, the reproduction number you assume. This is a synopsis of modeling that the department has done based on a bunch of different Canadian and international experts you've consulted. Is that correct? And if it is, to what extent do you have any concerns about what you're looking at in your planning scenarios when you're only working with less than 60%, it seems, of case data to work with to make your numbers on hospitalization and ICU? Maybe you can clarify some of that. I still don't quite understand why you're not releasing actual mathematical models done by your agency.
Yes, so we know that you have to use a whole suite of models depending on the question that you're trying to answer. So I think it is actually really great that we're consulting across the country with many different academics and experts. Some of the methods that we're using have already been published, of course. And in the annex slide, you'll see some of the references, for example, to the Imperial College London assumptions, and they can be adjusted. But I think that different models are there to answer different questions. This one, which takes into account a range of different published data, provides what we feel to be still reasonable as planning assumptions. So I think there is a single universal model that's going to take care of everything. You're going to have to use a suite of methods and models, and according to the question that you're trying to answer and what kind of planning you're trying to do. In a provincial level, they do a deeper dive on the ICUs, for example, and those, because operationally it's important for them to know, based on their capacity, whether they're reaching their capacity or not. So that's a different kind of model, but they use different ranges of assumptions. And so I think, we welcome any, published models as well in Canada that I think, but the majority of them, I have to say, is any dynamic model is saying that you got to keep those public health measures. Anything that you're doing which isn't slowly and cautiously can result in a resurgence, and that we might expect to be able to have to deal with some subsequent waves. So I think no matter which modeling you look at, modelers will agree that that is the extreme caution that we are messaging right now. But Canadians have done really well today. Our healthcare system is coping. So we just have to keep up with the great work that you're all contributing to.
It's Dr. Maybe I just add a quick point you mentioned about the data. And I will say that if you look at the models, obviously there's more data. They're closer to the ground in the provinces and territories in terms of what they're able to project based on the data they have. It is, to be honest, I would be the first to admit it, a bit of a weakness in terms of our collective system. The fact that at the federal level, our national level, we only get a certain percentage of the data. It's not because of a lack of goodwill and that the provinces and territories don't want to give us their data, but there are some challenges, issues, infrastructure, and so on. And I think, obviously, it's a good representation. We're all working together, I think, really well. And I think in the future, to be quite honest, those are things we need to look at in terms of how data is managed, how data is collected, transferred even at local level to provincial level, and then to the federal level. So those are things that we need to look at improving in the future.
Thank you. We'll be taking one last question. Globe and Mail.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. I have one question and one follow-up. You say we're in the green zone right now, so pretty low case rates. You mentioned in your opening remarks that means that low infection means that there's a higher proportion of people still open for infection later. So what does that mean for the measures? Does that mean that until we have better treatment or a vaccine, we will have this physical distancing in place at a certain level? And if we will maintain some physical distancing until that point, what is that physical distancing?
So that's, I think you grasp the concept that, it's likely that a significant proportion of our population is not immune. We're in the immunity task force that we talked about earlier this week. Some of the serological studies are going to try and answer some of those questions in looking at different parts of the population and the level of immunity or the level of infection, at least exposure to the virus. We still actually have to study the immunological response to the virus and how people develop immunity and how long they last for over time. So it's quite a dynamic piece that actually hasn't really been answered yet. So those questions will remain, which means you're right, that we will not go back to what life will be like before January of this year. Public health authorities will be easing things very gradually, but we talk about sort of living with the virus for a significant number of months and until there's enough level of immunity. But buying some time has lots of advantages because I think there are many clinical trials with treatments, not just the vaccine piece, but hopefully to manage the serious outcomes of illnesses and deaths as well. What I think, at the beginning, the easing off of some of these measures would be certain settings where they can manage the physical distancing and manage protocols and workplaces where you can reduce transmission. I think that all chief medical officers are thinking, you're not going to be having those giant mass gatherings. You're not going to be, having those kind of settings where we know transmission is going to accelerate really fast. People are going to be managing the size of those gatherings and having protocols in schools, workplaces, and other aspects of life where these basic fundamental hygienic measures, the policies and protocols, as well as all those public health capacities have to be in place. And you're going to have to dial some of them up again if you're going to see some cases. So I think I would love to be able to tell Canadians that life will be back to exactly where we were in December of last year. But no, we're going to be living having different routines, different daily routines. But I think all chief medical officers sees with that we need to balance the effectiveness of measures. We need to study them, but also balancing with any unintended consequences. We know the impacts to mental health, to gender-based violence, to other aspects of society and the economy. So it is a very delicate balance that we all have to really manage very, very well. But we all understand that if the virus accelerates again, that would be a massive setback to the gains that we've already had. So we've got to keep going at it. And so I think this is absolutely still a marathon, I think.
And you've talked to us over the last few weeks about how as you get more data, you have better quality data, you get a better sense of the trajectory of it, that there would be changes in the modeling. And yet in the long-term modeling, we don't see any changes today. So what specifically is the data you are missing today that you need in order to improve the models, in order to make them more accurate or reflect better what Canada is experiencing?
Well, I think there's a suite of models, and these were the initial models for planning purposes. You've got to kind of plan for the worst, even if you're not going to actually get there, but really function so that you can achieve the best. So that is the concept of that particular type of model. And so I think all of those public health measures still hold. There are many, many modelers right now working like 24/7, I think, across the academic sector and also within the agency working with them, who are looking at these dynamic models, feeding in all sorts of scenarios of what happens when you begin to relax different measures as to what the outcomes are. And I think those were actually quite interesting to see. But the bottom line that they're going to always say is that whatever we do, and if we eased off things too fast, and we can't monitor it, you might see a resurgence and a second wave that is bigger than that initial one. And so I think that is the message that they will be trying to convey as they are doing the modeling. And it is a message that the public health arena really take to heart.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, doctors. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse pour aujourd'hui. That'll be all for today. Thank you.